Hey, what is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back for the third installment of 11 tips for EU4 that I wish I had known when I was a beginner. It's been a long time since the last one. I've also improved my video quality since then, and the older ones kind of suck in comparison, but you can still go back and watch those if you haven't already. If you have already watched them and you've been waiting a while, I'm sorry for making you guys wait on it for so long. I might make it a regular thing now, but I'm not entirely sure as I don't really plan these things out. Speaking of unplanned things, I asked for 15k before September, and you guys did it in a week. Somehow the viewer ratio also went down after that. No idea how that works, but anyways. The only other goal I've set up for this year is 25k before 2021, so you guys know what to do. Anyways, let's get started. Everyone knows that power projection is super useful, being able to grant you +3 extra monarch points per month. But not every player knows the best way to subsidize their power projection in between wars. If you're a beginner, you should know to embargo all your rivals and insult one every few years when you don't have a truce for some basic power projection. For seasoned players who have the Wealth of Nations DLC, another really easy way to make up 30 power projection is simply by privateering the home nodes of your rivals. This is most effective against rivals who have all their trade in one node like Britain, Spain, and the Ottomans. You only need around 10 light ships or so to get started, making it possible for smaller nations as well. Keep in mind you have to keep privateering for it to stay, but it's a really good supplement while recovering for the next war. For tip number 2, let's talk about province strategy. A nation's capital is always worth more war score than it would be as a regular province. A good strategy is to take all the provinces surrounding the capital if you're looking to take as much land as possible in a war. The AI will almost always relocate their capital if it's isolated, meaning you can then take that province in a later war for a decreased cost. Bonus points if that capital was also on a fort, making that fort easier to take. This is a strategy most useful against larger nations, especially those like England. Just be sure to keep a close eye on your AE with all the extra land you'll be taking. A similar tip for number 3 when trying to take as much land as possible is to take high autonomy provinces in peace deals before going for low autonomy provinces. Provinces with low autonomy cost more war score to take, and since autonomy is set to 90% on territories now, the difference between taking a high and low autonomy province of the same dev is relatively little. A strategy like this is useful in the late game against nations like Russia or Ming, which often have a lot of provinces. That is, if they happen to exist in late game. On to tip number 4 regarding cavalry. It's commonly understood that cavalry should be faded out with time. To learn more about why, you can watch this analysis by Arumba on removing cavalry from your army in the late game. That being said, this actual tip is courtesy of Usul, who commented on my Battle Pope ROM. If you don't plan to use cavalry anymore, change your cavalry to Tech 3. All rebels spawn with your selected tech level, making them just a bit easier to destroy. Tip number 5 is all about avoiding coalitions the cheesy way. When there's a coalition stacking up against you, there's a period of time when nations won't leave because it hasn't been long enough. The AI tends to do a coalition check once they get to +50 relations with you, a certain number of years have passed, or they don't have enough AE opinion against you to stay in the coalition. This check also appears once the save is loaded for some reason. This means that you can suddenly dissolve coalitions when reloading your game. Your best bet is to wait a little while after the coalition gets gathered before you do though. If you've made nations too angry, or if the coalition is too big, then this trick isn't guaranteed to work either. For those clutch situations in Iron Man though, it can be incredibly useful, if not a little bit exploity. Tip number 6 for becoming an instant colonial empire is pretty simple. Whenever you full annex a country which has subjects, those subjects transfer to you. This is often really annoying when you just full annex someone with tributaries, or for instance, you really just want to invade Mexico. But when it comes to colonies, this actually makes your life much easier. Full annexing a colonial empire like Spain or Britain will transfer their colonies to you. This also works for integrating subjects, so if you want your subject to keep making colonies, it's sometimes a better idea to keep them around for a while. As an addendum to that, a subject will never take exploration ideas, so for instance, you'll want to PU Portugal or France after they've taken exploration ideas to get the most out of their time as a subject. Tip number 7 is for those times when you just have too many monarch points and have to pick something to dev. There's a really long analysis you can read by Waragata on Steam, which will be linked in the description. But what you need to know is that sorting by value in the Develop Province tab will sort by the best place for you to develop in. The only slight exception is for production development because you also want to keep in mind which provinces would benefit in trade. I've made a habit of refreshing the list every time I dev because it doesn't update by itself. Moving on to tip number 8, if you're playing a nation that has a generic mission tree, or at least has the default economic branch, you might feel compelled to take the high income mission pretty early on. However, it's actually best to wait a really long time before taking it. Right around when manufactories come into play and the average building is much more expensive is the best time to take it. I like to take it up to around 50 years before the manufactory's institution. This is generally when production and trade will start outweighing the income from taxation, so you'll be able to increase both through the spamming of manufactories. Tip number 9 is about getting Marines the hidden way. It's true that you can get Marines from national ideas or from taking naval ideas, which people usually don't. But there's actually another way too. In trade companies, the Governor General's mansion has been modified to add 2% Marines force limit. With the introduction of charters all around the world, it's not that hard to get 10% or more Marines force limit. Marines are useful because they take no attrition at sea and ignore crossing penalties. And with how much naval attrition's been ramped up in the recent patch, it's one of the better investments you can make for mid to late game island hopping. Tip number 10 is just letting you know that this button exists. I forgot about it for a long time too, so don't feel too bad about it. It converts some of your government reform progress into 20 governing capacity, which is kinda nice. It doesn't give you very much, but I often forget it exists in the late game, even after I finish all my reforms. That one wasn't much of a tip though, so I'll also just let you know that you should almost always be taking administrative ideas now when playing wide. I cannot possibly stress enough how useful administrative ideas are, since the governing capacity scales instead of just giving you some states like it did in 1.29. Even if you don't end up using the mercenary bonuses, it's really useful for the core cost reduction too. And its combination with influence makes the wide empire playstyle still easily doable, and world conquests much less of a hassle. I intend to make a whole guide on making the most of your governing capacity, but there's something useful to get started with. And finally, we're on tip number 11. One of the most important things to learn is how to decrease your AE very quickly. Basically, almost always take the Improve Relations Advisor. Your AE decay is based off your Improve Relations speed. There are various ways to improve it, but the main ways are through prestige, taking Diplo ideas, and the most important one that people can forget early on, the Advisor. If you can achieve 100% Improve Relations, you're essentially able to take land twice as frequently. It's also really useful for removing coalitions, since you can get to 50 opinion faster. I think the highest you can reasonably get Improve Relations to is around 150% increase, taking both Diplomatic and Humanist with the right advisor and max prestige. For reference, that is 2.5 times the normal decay rate, or 5 per year, so a nation can go from being in a coalition to 0 aggressive expansion impact in just 10 years. So there's another 11 tips for you guys, bringing our total to 33. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and if you want to have one of your tips featured in the next video, drop a comment down below with something everyone should know. Leaving a like also helps to show it to more people, so dropping one is hugely appreciated. Social media and Patreon links are in the description if you want to check those out. This is Quarbit signing off, and as always, have a fantastic day. I'd like to give a shout out to all of the patrons for the month of August, starting with those in the Admiral tier: T-Lord4, Ben Greenhagen, Car Newley, Tiger Pop, and Davin Collins. Those in the General tier: Justinian, Brendan Arcano, Torvald, and Farron. Those in the Prince tier: Natsuki, Rockbox 2020, and TFLJ Martis. In the King tier, we have Chewy Shoot as always, and the Mad Lads in the Conqueror of Worlds tier, we have the Mysterious, Quarbit, and the Watcher. Thank you guys so much for your pledges, it means a ton to me, and I cannot possibly thank you enough.